In this video, we're going to explore what's left of the Fernley and Lassen Railroad, about 30 miles west of here. As soon as we break free, we get a good crosswind, which means we've got to do a good bank to kind of stay on center line. Flying a little bit over to the side so I can keep the edge of the runway in my peripheral vision. Then, instead of staying right on the runway center line, I like to fly over to the side. The nose is very high and you can't see much in front of it. There could be an airplane landing on runway 21, which would just ruin your whole day. This close to the ground, there's quite a bit of turbulence, rocking us back and forth. Welcome to light plane flying. Construction of the Fernley and Lassen Railroad started in 1912. It went from Fernley, Nevada to Westwood, California. It took 2 years to finish the 135-mile line. The main intent was to access the vast timber resources of the Eastern Sierra. For 49 years, finished lumber and millwork products went to the eastern markets through Fernley, Nevada, where it connected with the Southern Pacific. In 1963, the Fernley to Flanagan section was abandoned. The tracks were pulled up in 1970. This came about because of a deal between the Southern Pacific and the Western Pacific to share the track from Flanagan, Nevada to Wesso, Nevada, near Winnemucca. This video is covering the section from Fernley to Sutcliffe at Pyramid Lake. In the 1950s, this remote section of railroad became an international mecca for rail fans, photographers, and historians, because it became the last bastion of heavy mainline steam power. While the Southern Pacific was dieselizing elsewhere, it sent its last almost new steam engines over to the Fernley and Lassen, or the Modoc, line. These double-engined behemoths are considered some of the best-looking double engines, articulated engines made. The same company that produced the famous SP Daylight engines gave some of their stylish touches, such as the skyline casing above the boiler and the stylish pilot. None of the Lima articulateds were preserved. What were they thinking? Grrr. Over the infamous 40-mile desert, we're approaching the Truckee River at Big Bend. Here the Truckee River turns to the north and starts heading towards Pyramid Lake. The Fernley and Lassen Railroad climbed out of the Truckee River Canyon up onto Dodge Flat. I will mark the railroad grade location with yellow dots periodically. The snaky meanders and oxbows of the Truckee River are hallmarks of an old river floodplain. It is said that the Truckee is about 12 million years old. It's about twice as old as the Grand Canyon. Ahead on the railroad at this point, there's an old Y, and investigation on the ground has shown that it looked like there was a construction camp, a temporary Y built to reverse engines. Right below us is the Gardella Canyon and the Esparras Ranch. It was a 1940s hideaway for wealthy people and celebrity friends. Later, it was given to the University of Nevada Agriculture Department. Then it went back to the Pyramid Lake tribe. This whole area we're over is the Pyramid Lake Indian Reservation. It runs from Wadsworth through Pyramid Lake far to the north. It's about 20 miles wide by 58 miles long. On each side of the view, we can see evidence of the previous shorelines of Pleistocene Lake Lahontan. The white deposits below are leftover sediments from this lake. They've been cut into canyons and badlands by erosion. Numana Fish Hatchery is right below us. It is a decades-long project to restore the native fish that were destroyed by upstream development. The Fernley and Lassen Railroad had to make a lot of cuts and large fills to get through these intersecting canyons that ran across its route. Next, we're coming up on the site of the 1860 First Battle of Pyramid Lake. Chief Numaga lured the cavalry up into a box canyon with a few braves. When Chief Numaga got them where he wanted them, a whole bunch of Indians appeared on the high ground above them in a classic Western movie fashion. Score 76 white, KIA 0 Indian. From here we can see evidence of the Walker Lane fault zone. The sag ponds seen on the left are typical of the dropped areas of a fault. The Walker Lane fault zone runs for 500 miles, starting down in Owens Valley and Death Valley, California. It runs through Walker Lake and then through Pyramid Lake and ends up near Lassen Peak. The Walker Lane fault zone takes up 25% of the boundary motion between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. Fault zones make handy places for rivers, railroads, and highways. At Numana Siding, the Fernley and Lassen curves away from the Truckee River and heads over to the shore of Pyramid Lake. Numana Dam diverts water into a canal that feeds the farms in the Nixon area. The railroad crossed the highway that goes over to Nixon. At this end of the Truckee River is the town of Nixon, which is the chief administrative place for the Pyramid Lake Indian tribe. It was not named for Richard Nixon, but for a Senator George Nixon, who was in office in the early 20th century. Why it was named for that turn of the 20th century senator, I don't know, because the reservation was started far before him in 1859. Marble Bluff Dam over there on the right. The lake had a 90-foot drop in level caused by upstream diversions. So the river started rapidly receding, causing a canyon and a steep gradient that fish couldn't climb. The dam was built to control this problem. The big white spot ahead is what used to be Duck Lake. It was a good hunting slough in the days before the water dropped. The area with trees is what used to be Libby Siding along the railroad. Upstream diversions caused a 90-foot drop in the level of the lake. The railroad starts to hug the side of the mountains on an ancient bench where a previous lake level was. The modern highway is built to the right, straight across on more level ground where it used to be underwater. Even on a fairly calm day, flying this close to the mountains, the air is always unstable on the east side. It gets a little better if you fly high, right about the ridge height, so I'm going a bit higher than good photography might demand. Turbulence and bounciness is the chief complaint of people who don't like light planes. Sometimes heading into a steep headwind is akin to being in a speedboat bouncing across waves. Air is a fluid and behaves like any other fluid. Aeronautical engineers work in the domain of fluid dynamics. Anaho Island appearing to the right of the landing gear. Anaho Island is a big pelican breeding ground. During the summer, the pelicans make annual rounds to surrounding lakes like Walker Lake and the Stillwater Wildlife Range over in Fallon. 80 to 100-mile round trips to catch fish and bring them back to their brood. A friend of mine spent the summer flying a team of wildlife biologists, I think, from a Texas university, and all he did for a couple of months is they just followed them around back and forth to these lakes. In the wintertime, the pelicans go all the way down to Mexico to Baja California in the Sea of Cortez. They've been doing it since Pleistocene times. The light area along the beach records the water level in 1912 when the railroad was built. There are construction photos showing boats floating right next to the tracks. They had a ferry operation going with docks and everything, various supply points along here. Pyramid Lake is about 10 miles wide by 25 miles long. Pyramid Lake is the largest lake in Nevada. It is larger than Lake Tahoe. This lake is 356 feet deep at its deepest point, 109 meters. In Pleistocene times, about 10 to 12,000 years ago, it was 890 feet deep. That is 534 feet higher than today. It was part of a paleo lake, ancient Lake Lahontan, that was the size of France. The paleo shoreline can be seen way up on the side of the mountains. Right on the left is Mullen Pass, where the highway goes to Sparks and Reno. We're coming up on Sutcliffe, 32 railroad miles from Fernley. Sutcliffe was the only train order station between Fernley and Wendell, which was 50 miles further on. The Fernley and Lassen route was what is known as dark territory, meaning it had no centralized traffic control or semaphores or light signals. Other than 3 train order stations over 82 miles, the only operational communication they had was phones at every siding, but that could be 8 to 10 miles between sidings. So an engine problem or a derailment could cause a long walk for somebody. Radio communications only came about in the late 1950s, and not on railroads like this, just the Class 1 mainline railroads. The communications environment nowadays is so different than what it used to be. The only thing that marks the site of the Sutcliffe station is a huge water tank that's still there. We're going to turn around at Sutcliffe and head back. I've got a lot of ground video of the sites along this route, but including them here would make it too long. That's for a separate video. At the north end of the lake is a place called the Needles where hot springs come out. Used to be a nice place where you could enjoy the hot baths, but no longer. The Needles hot springs are another area that have been closed on the lake due to vandalism. In January 1845, John C. Fremont came up over the pass from the San Emilio Desert. 2 weeks after crossing the 42nd parallel at the Mexican border. Camping next to Pyramid Island, he gave the lake its name. 2 other place names that Fremont left along the east shore are Howitzer Slide and Artillery Bay. Most of the east shore has been closed too because of vandalism. More indications of an increasingly uncivil society. The 1965 movie, The Greatest Story Ever Told, was made on the east side of the lake because of its resemblance to the Sea of Galilee. Huge areas of Nevada are restricted military airspace, partly because it looks like the Middle East, and it is considered a wasteland. For example, the 1950s atomic testing. My father used to take me out to the Nevada test site to see what 12 kilotons looked like. The air above the lake is pretty calm today, but when it gets stormy, it can be a very treacherous place for boaters. Over the years, a fair number of people have lost their lives on this lake. Having the money to buy a nice boat doesn't necessarily go with having seamanship skills or even common sense. The high winds can blow you over to the east side and keep you over there. It's difficult to return. The east side of the lake is just as remote as it was in Fremont's time. At night, it's just totally black over there, and that's one of the nice things about this lake, actually. The lake creates its own weather zone. Over to the east, it can get stormy and just really dump on Interstate 80 and the Lovelock area. 25 miles south where I live, looking towards the lake area can give you a good indication of what's coming if you see some really angry looking clouds. They often mean a really large rain pour or a lot of snow. This is another section where you can see how close the railroad came to the 1912 lake level. And we can see the highway to the left and, how close that is to the current lake level. The Fernley and Lassen had to build substantial trestle bridges over these little canyons with the creeks running through them. There are still remains of pilings that were cut off when it was abandoned. I've got a lot of ground video of these places, which are going to have to be for a different video. Haslip Siding was a favorite shooting spot for some of the now famous rail photographers of the 1950s. They knew this was a last chance to document the big steam era before its extinction. We're coming up on an old 1920s molybdenum mine. We can see the toxic stain running down the hillside, polluting the lake. On the ground you can still find the traces of the wagon roads that ran along the railroad, usually a little bit higher than the grade. Let's end this video with a 360-degree turn to get a scan of the area. We'll get a glimpse of the now extinct Winnemucca Lake that dried up in the 1930s and that was connected to Pyramid Lake. And a view of the highway to Gerlach, the route of the Burning Man event. And Anaho Island, which is only separated by about 3/4 of a mile from the mountains. Once the water level got so low that it became connected to the mainland and allowed snakes and coyotes to reach the pelican sanctuary. Interesting structure there. Successive sloughing because of the fault zone. I often see interesting things on a video that you don't see while flying because you're too busy flying to notice details.